version has the NBA leaderboard and does QB, running back, wide receiver, and it doesn't pull up any players because wrong sport. What is up, guys? You got one more hour of Awesemo content today. This is the late slate sweat and swap show where we get a little bit hot, a little bit humid, and we lean into the name of the show even when it's wildly uncomfortable. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who's going to help me talk about the main slate, talk about the swaptimizing, talk about the late slate. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, good. Something we just carry on to the show because number one, we said we were going to before the show started, and then we could also. But yeah, the right now it's the Sixers sweat right now, just what's going on with their rotation. And so something that when Josh and I were doing the show, both him and I really liked Tyrese Maxey a lot. And then I still ended up with a good amount of him, except scaled it back after the 76ers starting lineup came out. I said that I ended up with 25% Tyrese Maxey. But this is like the nut low situation for Tyrese Maxey because Steph Curry got hurt early in the first quarter. He ended up coming back, but Maxey didn't come in then. And then Isaiah Joe was ahead of Maxey in the rotation. And now Maxey, he played 6 minutes in the first half. The saving grace for him, though, is in true Houston Rockets fashion, they're getting their asses kicked for the millionth time in a row. And I still stand by the way, not to go too far off on a different tangent. Eventually, Demarcus Cousins is going to play fourth quarter minutes. It's not going to be this late, apparently, except there has to be a day where they don't lose by 20 points. It's just, once again, not on this day. But Tyrese Maxey looks like he's going to get his garbage time, and he's one of the most popular plays on DraftKings. So I'm sure that is what everybody is tilting about right now.
Yeah, that's what we talk about a lot on these shows recently, really, especially the ones that I'm doing. I'm making sure I know Greg's been kind of beating the drum too, the importance of late swapping, the value of that relative to tournaments and how so many teams lately that are winning the top GPPs or so many players that are winning them are because they're late swapping, getting the news aggressively as well. Like the other day when Joel Embiid was out, people went heavy to Ben Simmons. And I immediately, I was watching your guys' show. I was on the same page with you guys. I was getting more Korkmaz than Maxey, but then Korkmaz wasn't starting. So I had to immediately, right after the slate had started, thankfully I only had like 5% Michael Carter-Williams. Then I had to basically redo all my lineups, redo all the exposures that I do, sorted through Excel. So now I have to do that through Fantasy Cruncher, and it's working out so far. But we have to, I guess, is there anybody, Greg, that you feel particularly good about with your lineups that have you in a good position, or any lineups of yours that are bubbling up that actually might have a chance to do some damage based upon what you do in the late games?
So not ones that I could swap to this point, just because I didn't have very much exposure to the late games. I had assumed that that Kawhi Leonard was going to play. And so there are guys that not that I would have been really heavy on, except guys, like Lou Williams, Marcus Morris. I actually think Zubats is a good contrarian play. But these are guys who I would have liked to have switched on to, except by the time the Kawhi news came out and there was so much good value earlier in the slate, like most of my lineup spots are taken in most of my spots. Like I even tried to swaptimize my DraftKings and FanDuel lineups and it changed almost nothing.
Yeah, I think, there are some guys that I got to a little bit more. I've actually did a swaptimization before coming on here. So that's the swap part here in the late slate sweat and swap show. And I got to 27% Serge Ibaka. And the reason I was able to get there is because I had a ton of Steven Adams in the late slate. So that, was one, or in the later games, rather, the 6 o'clock game. That helped me get to Ibaka. That's not one you could do now. But for me, I really feel like Ibaka is the one that jumps out. I think trying to get some more Lou Williams makes sense. I got to 16% Lou Will. Certainly has an upside, I think, projection-wise. Maybe even a guy you could fade on the late slate itself, but getting him in case he finds some upside against Utah, I think that seems reasonable to get to him a bit more. Greg, do you have any feel here for going to guys like Lou Williams, even Patrick Beverly? I got 4% of. I know our boy Eric Lindquist also always loves Terrence Mann, jamming him in wherever possible. So any Clippers that you could prioritize, I guess, if you had some room like I have or somebody else may have?
So did you have room? Because I know you said the late slate. Was it for that slate or for the main slate they were able to swap to all these guys?
No, it's for the main slate. So actually, okay. I think it's mostly affected because the Pelicans game is now going. I still have a lot of Jimmy Butler, or had a lot of Jimmy Butler, I think, or at least a good amount. So that gave me some room to get to Marcus Morris. But it just sort of the way that it worked out, where I was heavy Draymond Green, heavy Steven Adams, heavy Jimmy Butler, and heavy Isaiah Roby too. So because of that, I was able to make some changes.
So I got to... Like I said, I got a few lineups with Lou Williams. I got a couple lineups with Reggie Jackson, but nothing really was able to change just because of the amount of exposure I had to the early games. Like I had a bunch of guys from the Celtics. I had a bunch of Sixers today. So the way my lineups shook out, I wasn't able to. Pretty anticlimactic for the swap, sweat, and spit show here. But it just I didn't have the flexibility in my lineups.
Yeah, no, that's sometimes the way it goes. And it's all about, honestly, I think there's a portion of luck to it unless you're planning around in advance. And, I'm feeling pretty good though. I have a good amount of Delon Wright, good amount of Jeremy Grant, both guys playing well against the Celtics. I could use a little more productive Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown having a terrible game today where, in a way that maybe you wouldn't have expected against Atlanta, and Tristan Thompson coming through. And I feel like we have to, I wouldn't say victory lap, but give a little bit of applause to Michael Porter Jr. for coming through, having a competent game today. He wasn't even scoring that much, but was blocking, rebounding, assisting. I think he had a couple steals too. Like pretty good all around game for Michael Porter Jr. So he's officially off my personal shit list.
Yeah, I mean, so on FanDuel, he has 21.9 fantasy points so far in the first half. So, I mean, he's easily going to end up, it looks like, on the optimal lineup on FanDuel, unless he, breaks his back at halftime, which wouldn't be the first time in his career. But yeah, at least the rate that he's going looks like he's going to be on the optimal lineup. He just got stat corrected one negative point. So I guess he got a turnover or something. So, all right, he's going in the wrong direction. Maybe we have to back off that. But yeah, so I mean, Michael Porter Jr. for sure, one of the top plays. Seth Curry, one of the top plays right now on FanDuel. Those are the two, and Terrence Ross also. There's like three guys who look like are really locked into the optimal lineup now. Maybe Tobias Harris too, but I assume the Sixers starters are not going to be in all that much longer.
Yeah, the Tobias Harris day, kind of a crazy one. And I guess that's sort of what happens. But Tobias at the 14, I think, points, real life points in that first quarter. And Jason Tatum's coming through for me right now. This is the second day in a row that I'm heavy Jason Tatum, heavy Tristan Thompson, and both guys actually having nice days. So that's why we talk about a lot on here, where sometimes the plays that we may reference here are just ones that we either have popping up in our data, have popping up with Awesemo's data, whatever the case may be. And really going back to these guys and sort of trusting that night in, night out, because I know people often get afraid of like, oh, this guy beat me, like Michael Porter Jr., where it's like, oh, he's been bad, he beat me, like I'm not going to play him anymore. And now Porter Jr. is 6% owned, and maybe he doesn't have as great of a second half, but like I think this is sort of the point of DFS, is playing the best plays every night, playing the guys you have projected the best every night, and when they do come through, hopefully it does end up paying some dividends.
Yeah, and also there was a difference between Michael Porter Jr. on FanDuel and DraftKings today. So FanDuel you had to wrestle with, he was still pretty chalky. He ended up being 25% on FanDuel. His projected ownership, I think, was a little bit higher. But then still, it was something that Josh and I talked about on Live Before Lock also, is if you didn't want to play Michael Porter Jr., there was nobody else to play in his price range. And that was the same issue I said I had with him yesterday also, where I didn't like him as much. There was nobody else to play in his spot. And that was the same issue today, where it was like, all right, am I going to play Kyle Anderson instead of him? Am I going to play, I'm trying to remember, like Bogdanovich was the other options in the price range. So it was just somebody who we both agreed we had projected so much higher that even though he was somebody who rated out as a pretty popular player, there was just nobody to switch off him to.
Here's one YouTube chat we can hit on really fast. And this is, again, as always, if I talk about something in YouTube chat, just referencing it as a talking point, not trying to tear anybody down or make them feel bad, because it's all about discussion here on these shows. But Trill's saying they said Terrence Ross wasn't a good play tonight and he's killing it right now. First of all, it's going to happen a lot data-wise, but I think it's sort of an important lesson to take away for some of our guys here who are, dabbling more in DFS, starting to play more money, maybe even had a win, and are trying to figure out then working it backwards, how to get to where an Awesemo is or where some of our founding team is. But really the main thing with these plays is that Terrence Ross was a worse play on paper because he's getting less minutes. The one thing that benefits Terrence Ross is then he's moved away from the starting group, moved away from Vooch a little bit more. His usage rate actually goes down in games where he's playing alongside Vooch, and that makes sense because Vooch dominates so many possessions. But I think that's something to kind of remember with these things, where a guy like Terrence Ross, who can shoot the lights out, is always going to be a GPP play. But for the most part, if you're talking about realistic probabilities, likely probabilities, Terrence Ross getting to 45 fantasy points today in a day where Evan Fournier was back in a low-pace spot against the Knicks, like that wasn't the spot to expect it, I would say, for Terrence Ross.
So I have like a couple live lineups on FanDuel that have Terrence Ross in them. They're literally my only Terrence Ross lineups, though. Like, he wasn't somebody I targeted. I think I have like 5 total lineups with Terrence Ross. I have to check exactly what the number is, but they also just happen to be my 5 best lineups now because Terrence Ross is breaking the slate and having just a ridiculous amount of fantasy production. But I don't remember talking about Terrence Ross at any point during the day either. He wasn't somebody I thought about. He just ended up in my lineups because that's what happens when you build 150 lineups, is there's going to be guys you don't like or dislike that just end up in, like 3, 4, 5% of lineups.
especially at a price point like Ross had. I mean, on FanDuel, it's obviously different, but like on DraftKings, he was 6,300. And logically, you're not going to get to that price point unless you have a lineup that is being well projected, because the other guys who are around that 6,300 on DraftKings makes, Terrence Ross a necessary piece. And I think that's something to consider too, where it's not sometimes about Ross. Like, that's when people win tournaments, is when that lineup with the $6,300 guy, where there wasn't a lot of popular plays at 6,300, like those lineups going off is just how GPPs happen. But I think expecting those plays, or even going like, I'm going to fade, whatever. We didn't talk about in the tip off either. So I think maybe the deeper dive or the strategy show, I don't even know. We have so many shows on here. I'm sure somebody at some point today was like, Terrence Ross is a worse play if Evan Fournier is in, but like the logic is there. That's the way to still approach it on an overall basis. And then when you are MMEing, then you get a little more flexibility to play the Terrence Rosses of the world.
Yeah. And then still, he wasn't somebody, I was indifferent about Terrence Ross. Like I didn't think about him even today. There was no point where anybody asked me a question about Terrence Ross or even thought about him. But I mean, there's a lot of plays you end up on just because they fill out the remaining salary on the roster, and that's just who you end up playing in that situation.
Yeah, so that's basically it. Let's see, where is this? There was one chat here. Michael Hammer saying, okay, onto the late slate, please, which is great that we have producers on YouTube telling us when segments need to end. We do a little bit of everything on the show. We're talking about the main slate. We're talking about the overall DFS process, and we have plenty of time to talk about the 2-game slate ahead of us. So have no fear. Michael, get your questions in. But I guess maybe because he's the Michael Hammer, the late night Hammer, huh? He must want to get to the point right away, but also go fuck yourself. Really.
Yeah, I don't know. What if that's not, maybe that's not the reference that the Hammer's referring to though. Maybe he's just Michael Hammer. That's what he goes by. That's like what he is on Tinder, right? He's just Michael Hammer. Or he's like, there's an MMA fighter, Thiago Santos, who really leans into it, just as a giant hammer tattooed on his chest. It's like, that's a little much.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. But either way, that's what the show is. We talk about a lot of things, and that's the important part. And Lofty there taking some accountability in chat, saying Josh and I said that, you imagine at some point they said that Price at his highest point of the season on DK against the slowest pace team in basketball wasn't great if Fournier played. Yeah, that's the nature of the beast in these sports. And sometimes you get lucky with it, sometimes it works out. And we hope any of you guys who played Terrence Ross, hopefully the rest of your lineup looks good, because nothing would tilt me more than if I had somehow landed on Terrence Ross and it's just surrounded by the Tyrese Maxeys of the world on the slate. That would be the saddest thing.
that is what I typically feels like happens to me, but maybe not the case today, because my lineups are looking good at the moment. I could use let's see, who do I need to play well in the second? I could use a good game from John Morant, good second half from Michael Porter Jr. I would like the Sixers starters to play in the fourth quarter. That doesn't look like it's happening at this point.
Yeah, so make sure you guys hit the like button too here. We do, as I always like to do here on the special time on the channel, the back half of the Live Before Lock shows that I'm hosting, or really any show leading up to a slate here, because this is not so much a traditional Live Before Lock. But hit the like button, get us to a respectable amount of likes. I'll keep that vague, but just if you're watching right now, I think we have about 300 people watching here, 335 people watching. So hit that like button, get us a certain amount of likes, and I'll give you guys the top 5 projected own plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. And in fact, we do need an ownership run here to come up here. So as soon as that comes through, I'll make the executive decision to go and give you guys some of the top plays. But hit the like button, get us there, and make us feel good about ourselves. And this new show here that we're doing 5 days a week, always going to be around this time, basically an hour before the last either full night slate or showdown game. Like yesterday, there was a big 100K up top tournament with that. So that's one. Question here from Travis Johnson. Talk about Anthony Edwards' first half, please. We're taking requests now. And I think this is one that is interesting. I'm going to actually see here, because I don't know how Anthony Edwards did, because one of the things for me was not playing him today after he went off last game. And I don't know if that was the right play or not. Greg, do you have any idea at all offhand how Anthony Edwards is doing?
I'm bringing it up right now. Anthony Edwards has 4 points on 1 of 6 shooting from the field. So what happened? I don't know, because I'm not watching the game, but it looks like, did he get in foul trouble maybe? No, Cat's in foul trouble though. Yeah, so they just went heavier with, they played a really weird rotation today. So the starters, other than McDaniels, who was starting in place of Malik Beasley, who was dealing with some sort of team suspension, there's not a single starter played more than 15 minutes in the first half for the Timberwolves. So 14 minutes for Edwards, 14 minutes for Rubio, 14 minutes for Towns, 9 minutes for Vanderbilt. And then they went with a deep rotation off the bench. So they just played it looks like they're just playing a really deep rotation today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing that you worry about with A guy like Anthony Edwards, who sometimes has the usage, who sometimes, can just miss a ton of shots. And I think people chasing the big days with him as a rookie, he's going to find his depth, but that's sort of the type of plays you normally try to avoid here. Guys that don't project that well, that you can also, feel like I think that's really the main thing. He doesn't project that well. And I think chasing sort of, he's going to have these results, even this spot where he started and Beasley didn't start, like you would think that's an ideal situation for him, but he just missed a lot of shots. That's sometimes how it goes. Let's start talking about the late slate though, because God forbid that we do the thing we always do on the show and make executive decisions with the planning of the show as we always do here. But we got a couple games here, which actually do have some news that's worth hitting on. Utah, another spot that maybe you could target if you wanted to swap optimize or had the ability to do so. No Mike Conley for them again today. Joe Ingles getting a bit of a boost up there in minutes, one would think, and also assist upside. He's been over 27% assist rate in court time without Conley. Donovan Mitchell also gets a little bumps in usage, bumps in assist rate too. Jordan Clarkson more run. I think everybody gets a little more appealing here, though. I guess a chance maybe they put it down on the Clippers with no Kawhi. The total in this game was 5 with the assumption, or 5 points favoring Utah here with Kawhi, assuming that he would play. He's not playing here, so maybe it's moving a little bit more. But Greg, how do you feel about the Jazz with no Conley? It's just still a spot where I don't think they're priced up enough on the late slate itself or on actually the main slate either.
So actually, the Clippers opened as 3.5 point favorites, and then it moved. Now it's at, I think, 6.5 at DraftKings. But yeah, it moved a ton because of the Kawhi news. So the other thing to consider too is Rudy Gobert scores more fantasy points per minute this year when Mike Conley's off the court. Sees a little bit of increased usage. So across the board, we're looking at guys who, had I known this news earlier in the day with Conley and Kawhi Leonard, there are players that I would have gotten to, but just didn't because, like I said before, I ran out of spots in my lineup to that point. But in terms of the late slate, I mean, Joe Ingles now is one of the stronger plays for sure. Jordan Clarkson also a stronger play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. He's only 5,900 on FanDuel, so I like him a little bit more on FanDuel, but he's still a good play on DK as well. Jordan Clarkson, somebody who the minutes are a little hard to nail down at times, but his usage is so high when he's on the court as of late that it hasn't really mattered. So last game against the Sixers, I mean, I know also he shot the ball incredibly well in that game. He made 13 of 20 shots, 8 of 13 from 3, but still 29 minutes at a 38% usage rate. So he's not somebody who's going to play, 34, 35 minutes. And sometimes Clarkson only plays 24, 25 minutes, even in games when Conley's out. But he shoots so often that it still is going to make him one of the better plays, especially for a 2-game slate.
Yeah, we need still to get that ownership update run. Let me actually see if that's come through because that's going to be an important one here. But prior to the news about Conley officially being out and also the Kawhi news, which is we get an ownership update usually during the halfway point of the show, somewhere around there. So we'll see how this looks because it's going to be some big moving here. But overall, Clarkson, the most recent one, was at 19% ownership. Maybe that comes up a little bit more because he is kind of at an awkward price. But I don't think he'd be a chalky play here. I do think Ingles, though, has a pretty good shot at being a very highly owned play on the late slate. We'll see how it looks. But Greg, is there anybody, I guess, we're sort of reading the tea leaves as best we can here. But do you have any feel here for how the ownership is going to move around? Because we already had Gobert and Mitchell be pretty chalky. I guess they get more chalky, but I don't know who takes a big jump here. Even Bojan is getting a lot of ownership, which surprises me.
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit different across the two sites. So on FanDuel, I assume for the late slate, Jordan Clarkson is just going to be super chalky at 5,900. I think he's going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate. On DraftKings, it's going to be a little bit different because he's priced at 6,500, and $600 doesn't seem like a ton, except it ends up making a ton of difference, especially because on FanDuel, you have to roster 2 shooting guards, and that is not the case on DraftKings. There's a little bit more lineup flexibility. So considering you have to roster 2 shooting guards, I think that we're going to see a lot of ownership go to Jordan Clarkson, Donovan Mitchell, and Lou Williams. I assume that those 3 is going to be really what eats up most of it.
Who would you prioritize then, accounting for what we're expecting ownership to be? Because I still think Ingles looks pretty appealing to me at his price point. It's still not high enough on DraftKings to scare me away. I don't see getting to Ingles, or getting to Royce O'Neal. I don't see getting to Bojan. I'm with you though. Clarkson a priority, and Mitchell I think I'd prioritize. Gobert, I think is a fine play, but I'd personally rather have Ibaka, I think, relative to his price.
So I'll talk about it just a couple different ways. So let's start on FanDuel, just the shooting guard position. Where I'm assuming now the chalk is going to be Jordan Clarkson and Lou Williams, and then Donovan Mitchell to a lesser extent, just because he exists in a price range all by himself. He's 8,100 on FanDuel. The next most expensive shooting guard is Lou Williams at 6,700. So if you want to differentiate a little bit or save salary, I think Terrence Mann makes sense at 4,000. He's somebody who I assume will be a little bit different and put you on a different roster construction in the field. Or if you're paying up, I think Andrew Wiggins, who's priced right in between Lou Williams and Jordan Clarkson. I think that he's somebody else who would make as a pivot that people aren't going to get to relative to a 2-game slate as much as those other two options, but still guys that look like strong plays to me.
How are you feeling about Serge Ibaka? Because he's a guy the other day that Josh had recommended getting a little bit higher on because of that was actually, I think, yesterday with Tristan Thompson. I was talking about some of the other guys I was getting, and Serge was a priority play the last time that there was no Kawhi. Honestly, every day blurs together. So just whenever it was, it happened. That's the main thing. But Serge with the usage rate, I mean, some of the numbers for him do kind of jump off the page with no Kawhi, with no Paul George. He gets to a 27% usage rate. The rebound rate also gets to 19%. Ibaka at his price point, I feel like, nobody's ever unfadable, and the projection's not, insane here. Awesemo has him at just around 30. I have the same, but I still think at his price, I would rather get Ibaka than guys like Gobert. I know Gobert's had more usage in games without Conley for whatever reason that may be, but I just feel like the value is there. And I think I'd rather pace in different directions at center and take Ibaka, but how are you feeling about his prospects?
So in the run of lineups I have Ibaka at 20%. So definitely somebody who's viable, but I actually like Kelly Olynyk a little bit more for a cheaper price. It's a much more favorable matchup going up against the Warriors for Olynyk than Ibaka has against the Jazz. The real concern I have going up against Utah is, number one, it's just a really tough matchup. Utah definitely presents the most difficult matchup of the 4 defenses on the slate. We have the shorthanded Clippers, we have Utah, we have a bad Warriors defense, and then we have a struggling Heat team. So easily the most difficult matchup anybody faces is the Clippers going up against Utah. So my biggest concern with Ibaka is that matchup. And then also, I still think he's going to be fairly popular. We don't have that latest run of ownership yet, obviously, but I assume that Kelly Olynyk will be a little bit less popular for a cheaper price. And I like the matchup a lot better for him.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the matchup to me, and this is actually an interesting, I think, topic to talk about a little, because in defensive games, I think people do worry about, playing Utah seems so bad, or, they are, a team with one of the best defensive efficiency ratings, definitely on the slate and overall in the league, 105.8 for them on the year. But you still have a game here with a 229 combined total, which I know you said the actual spread itself has moved around, but I assume the over-under hasn't changed too much here. And actually, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just pulling the data from Fantasy Cruncher and then repurposing it in my Excel spreadsheet. But if the total's still there, and if Utah's as high as it is, and the Clippers were at 112, let's say even they drop to 109, like somebody has to score here. And I think it has to be probably Lou, Ibaka, and Morris, I would guess, would be the main 3 I would see here. Guys like Terrence Mann, even Beverly might project well, but really, Lou and Ibaka and Morris have to do something, you would think. So like, at what point does it get for you, looking at defensive matchup, like at what point are you looking at the Vegas total? At what point are you just going, playing these guys against Utah just doesn't seem like the move for me?
So it's a little column A and a little column B. Also, when it's a 2-game slate, you can't really totally weigh it all that much because there's only 2 games to choose from. So, I mean, the total is what the total is for 50% of the players on the slate. But I'm also just looking at it from a standpoint of Kelly Olynyk and Serge Ibaka, at least during the time that Olynyk's been a starter, last game notwithstanding, where he only played 24 minutes. Other than that, as a starter, he's played really well for the Miami Heat, and he's fared better as a starter this year than Serge Ibaka has as a starter for the Clippers on the whole in terms of their average production. So that would lead me a little bit more towards Olynyk. The other thing too is I do think there's a little more blowout risk in the Jazz game than there is in the Heat Warriors game. So Kelly Olynyk, also I think the $300 salary savings helps a little bit, and the fact that he's multiple position eligibility. So that's also one of the reasons I'm getting to Kelly Olynyk a little bit more than Serge Ibaka. Serge Ibaka only a center, Kelly Olynyk power forward and center eligibility.
Also, people in the chat are saying that Wiseman's coming back, but I haven't seen anything about him back today, and it doesn't seem like it's reflected in the minutes. Have you seen anything about that?
I'll check. I'll check the old Twitter right now.
The most recent thing I'm seeing, Steve Kerr said that between Loon and Wiseman coming back relatively soon, we have several decisions to make. But like that doesn't mean now. Yeah, I don't think he's in. And if News God's in chat, let us know, because I haven't seen him being marked active.
Yeah, I just looked on Twitter and I didn't see anything. So yeah. I was just searching. I have not seen anything of that sort. Although not the first time that chat's thrown us off the scent today with news, because we had somebody who insisted that Doris Burke said on ESPN that Tyrese Maxey was starting for the 76ers today, which obviously
I did hear that. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Can't trust Doris Burke. She, that's I guess a great analyst, a great person in terms of a commentator, but for your news, I guess you gotta stick with the Wojs of the world.
Well, also, this was so many degrees removed from what the actual news source was going to be. It was like somebody was watching ESPN and thought they heard what might have been Doris Burke said that Tyrese Maxey might have been starting for the 76ers. It was so far removed from an official source about what the starting lineup was going to be, and then it didn't matter because we found out 5 minutes later that he wasn't in the starting lineup anyway. But that's also why I know people always get upset when, and I know Spags has felt the wrath of chat when he's told them to wait for the verified news to come out. People don't like when they get shut down by him, but yeah, Wiseman isn't back. Tyrese Maxey didn't start earlier. That's why we wait for our guy News God to come in and drop the goods.
Yeah, it is an important part of things that we harp on a little bit when we have to, but confirming news is like the most important thing you do DFS wise. And I think in particular, that's one that for me would have been very important because as I mentioned earlier, I'm heavy on Draymond in the main slate. I think for the late slate as well, I think he's still a top play. And the main thing for me, I think if you look at Golden State's rates, and I think a lot of people will go on the NBA Wowies or whatever you use for your on-off court data, it would look at, what's court time like with Steph Curry because he's the highest usage guy. The guy who really affects his offense is Draymond Green being back out there and playing center minutes because his assist rate's been up so much. He's up to a 38% assist rate in court time without Wiseman and Looney. He also, shoots a little bit more, but that's not what matters. It's to me, what matters is kind of what he takes away from Steph Curry. And I know that Greg, you and Josh earlier talked about not getting to Steph quite as much. I'm in the same boat where I've been getting to Steph less and less. I know there's going to be days where he breaks the slate. Maybe it's against Miami, though I would think Miami defensively sound enough to kind of limit what he does. But I think going to Draymond, I think people just keep thinking that Steph is the player that he is looking at the season-long data, when in reality, Draymond's taking possessions away from him by just distributing the ball a little more evenly. And I don't think it's great for Steph that, Draymond's out there being the point guard and the center at the same time.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's good for his usage and his scoring numbers. By the way, we have news that I'm going to hit in a second after talking about Steph Curry. I assume you, yeah, okay. So we do have for Steph, it's helping his scoring numbers and his usage is way up, but his assists aren't. So, I mean, look at the last 4 games, Steph, 6 assists, 5 assists, 2 assists. And that's kind of where he's been around since we've seen a heavy dose of Draymond Green at centers. He's topping out at 5 or 6 assists. And while, yeah, it's nice that he's scoring a few more points per game, except it's hurting the other areas of his game. And so that's why it's not having a real material positive impact on his fantasy point totals, even though the scoring is up. It's because the assists are down. So the news that we have to get to now, and this is confirmed news. This is not fake news. This is not third-hand news from Doris Burke. This is Luke Kennard out today because of knee injury. So this is going to impact the slate quite a bit because the Clippers already thin on the wing with no Kawhi Leonard, no Paul George. Now there's very few guys to give minutes to.
Yeah, so Kennard, I had getting 21 minutes without Kawhi. I think that was in the most recent run of Awesemo. So let's see. 21 then. So then that probably goes. Amir Coffey was already getting 21 here, but I guess maybe you give eight more to Man, and then
Terrence Mann's going to play a lot, I think, now.
So Terrence, all right. So let's give Terrence Mann 35. Does Lou get a little more then too, or Lou or Reggie? I feel like Reggie could pick up a few more and it wouldn't be the worst.
I think Reggie probably plays like 32 minutes and Lou like 36.
Okay, so Awesemo had him at 32.8. Let me see what this does. I think this makes Lou look like a better play right away. I think Amir Coffey could be in consideration, but I agree Mann would probably be the one that gets a bit of a boost. Our boy Eric Lindquist in the chat here, who is definitely not Greg. That's the important thing to know. His name isn't Greg. He's not Greg. I'll never call him Greg again until the next time I accidentally am just fantasizing about my shows with Greg and it comes out. But yeah, I think for me, Terrence Mann would be the one who I feel like gets a little more secure here.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So Terrence Mann, who is looking up his price point really quick, he was
it's 4,300 on DK,
4,300 on FanDuel, and I think 4,000 flat on FanDuel. Yeah, 4,000 flat on FanDuel. So I mean, before I said that I thought that Terrence Mann looked like a good pivot off of what I thought were going to be some of the more popular shooting guards. Terrence Mann probably becomes one of the most popular shooting guards now on both FanDuel and DraftKings because the minutes they have to go somewhere. How many guys active do the Clippers have? They have Williams, Ibaka, Mann, Jackson, Zubats, Morris, Coffey, Beverly, and Patterson. The wild card here is Beverly, right? Because he rested yesterday. He's generally been playing limited minutes. I find it hard to believe they're going to give him massive minutes, but if the game's competitive and he plays, like 28 or 29 minutes, that's way different than what I think most people are giving Patrick Beverly right now, just because he's been playing limited minutes as of late. I think that he has the widest range of outcome in his playing time now.
Yeah, I would agree because Beverly at 23 minutes. Let me see actually if this is enough. I'm still short 12 minutes with giving the guys a few more. So I feel like giving Beverly, getting him to 30. Let's just see how he looks if I give him 30. I think that's a reasonable approach here. So Beverly, assuming he somehow gets 30, and didn't give Amir Coffee anymore. Beverly Beverly looks pretty good. I would have Beverly at like 25 fantasy points if he got to 30 minutes. So that's not terrible for Beverly.
So here's what makes it hard. So Beverly's played 3 games since coming back from a knee injury. In those 3 games, he's played 18 minutes, 12 minutes, and 20 minutes. So we have to assume he's on some sort of minutes restriction, but they've also never had a situation where everybody's out. Like there just aren't other people to play. So I don't confidently say Patrick Beverly plays even 28 or more minutes, but we have to give those extra minutes somewhere. And I think that there's enough of a range of outcomes to say that, let's say you're playing 20 lineups. I think you want to have Patrick Beverly in at least 1 or 2 of them. I wouldn't totally fade him just because his projected minutes, I assume, are going to be fairly low by Alex and most people, just because it's hard to expect him to play massive minutes coming off that. But it's also one of these things where it's a range of outcomes where you could only apply in a projection set 1 set of minutes to each individual player. And there's far from one range of outcomes with Patrick Beverly. Like most players we know, like, hey, this guy plays 26, 27 minutes every day. That's what he's going to play. That's not the case for Beverly. Beverly, it depends on what his restriction is, and that's probably something we're not going to know until like after the game's over.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way to look at it too. I think 30 feels aggressive, but I'm just trying to get a read on if he's actually worth trying to force in. I'm doing the usual thing I always do though for the late slate. I don't think I'm going to swap again. I feel like I got enough Lewin of the Clippers guys that I want, including Terrence Mann. Didn't get any Kennard anyway, so I think I'm going to ride with it. That I do think there's probably room to optimize again, and I do think if you do optimize again, you probably will get more Lou Williams, I would think, because he looks pretty good. We also got the ownership projection, so let's flip the hat. We'll do the ceremonial flipping of the hat here. I also had another bit planned, Greg, which you don't know. I know Greg's not a drinker, but it's Wine Wednesday here on the late slate swap and sweat. And I'm going to have a nice little sip of wine while if we want to play the register sign with my $8 bottle of wine.
Yeah. If I mean, we would just see me die if I had, if I drank wine. The reason being is because, so I have Crohn's and colitis, and the medicine I take, it just doesn't mix with alcohol. So it just creates like, remember in like high school, you put the Mentos in the Coke bottle and it just creates a weird chemical reaction. That's basically what it does to me. And I just explode.
You'd be like a pigeons eating rice at a wedding, basically.
Yeah, I would just slowly start changing colors and I would expand. It would be like the kid who eats blueberries in Willy Wonka.
So I will drink the wine, and hopefully you guys have a fine bottle of wine at home for yourselves on Wine Wednesday. Wait till Tequila Thursday and I don't know, freebasing Friday. What? It's gonna get weird here on the show, but we got the ownership, and I feel. Go ahead.
I was gonna say just wait for Meth Monday, but I kind of missed my spot there with the joke.
No, that's my bad. I was just plowing through because I want to get to the top 5 owned plays, but we only have 88 likes, even though we have 460 people in here. So get the likes up here. Let's say 110 likes. If we get there, I'll give away the top 5. Right now, I'm feeling only like the top 3. So I feel like it's a team effort here. It's a community here at Awesemo. We're all in the same boat, trying to make things work. Oh, Whiskey Wednesdays is Neuron Twitch is saying, yeah, Whiskey Wednesdays would also be fine, but then I would be under the table by the back half of the show. Water Wednesday. We got 115. All right, that was fast. I appreciate how whenever I hold people hostage for data, that they're willing to support. But always hit the like button, helps us out a bunch here. And whenever I'm hosting, I'll give you guys the likes anyway. So just give you guys the ownership anyway. So hit the likes. Top 5 on DraftKings. Number 1 in the most recent update here, we got 7 minutes ago. Jimmy Butler at 49%. Number 2, Lou Williams at 45%. Number 3, Bam Adebayo at 42%. Kind of surprised by that. Number 4, Donovan Mitchell at 40%. And number 5, Rudy Gobert at 39%. Greg, relative to DraftKings in that top 5, does one guy seem like one right away you'd want to get under the field on?
I'm surprised the number for Gobert is that high. And that's not to say I don't think that he's a good play for the slate, but we haven't seen Gobert pick up that much ownership in general in DFS this season. And he's somebody who I just kind of have rated as a fair play in terms of projection. So I'm surprised that he's that popular.
Yeah, I agree with that. I got to look at Adebayo again, because I know he was popping up on our ownership earlier in the day, and it was one of those where I was like, I don't get how people are getting there. I guess Alex has a 45 projection on him. I only have him for 42, so that would be a tiebreaker there. I would greatly favor Jimmy Butler, though, over him. Like, I feel pretty good about the Butler ownership. I know he's probably due for a down day, but his rates are out of this world. And I know, Greg, that you got sucked into the vortex of Josh trying to belittle Jimmy Butler for some reason. The one guy who would take it personally and show up and slap Josh in the back of the head. But I feel like Jimmy Butler, fantastic DFS play that I would take at any ownership tonight.
Yeah, so in the run of lineups I did, I have about twice as much exposure to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. So I agree with you, and it's for multiple reasons. And this is on DraftKings. Number one is because I have Butler projected higher, but then number two also is the positional difference. So Bam only being center eligible, where we are able to get Butler at multiple positions. Because he's able to play in the forward spot also. He's only a small forward on DraftKings, but you can play him at small forward or forward. That gives him more utility than Butler, who you have to actually play in the utility spot or take one of those center spots.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I don't know, Bam I like the most when Butler's out. And I feel like that's one thing that maybe has slipped around here, where Bam has become so important to this offense that maybe it's not as much of a contingency. But with Bam's price where it is, I'd rather find, the $200 on DraftKings and get to Butler. And what Greg mentioned about positionality too, playing centers, I think you can go to a bunch of guys there at center today, whereas it's small forward. I don't know who has the upside of Jimmy Butler, who's been above 50 fantasy points. I feel like 3 out of his last 4. He's been looking fantastic, and I wouldn't get away from him. Greg, you mentioned earlier you might consider getting away from Kelly Olynyk, and he's still projected. Actually, did I paste this in? I think
no. I said getting away from Serge Ibaka in favor of Kelly Olynyk.
Oh, okay. Well, how about if I were to tell you that Kelly Olynyk is now going to be 25% owned on the late slate?
That's a pretty nondescript number, right? That's not, that's not some number where I'm like, oh my God, that's I mean, Ibaka's still projected to have more ownership. When you said 25%, were you saying that in terms of you couldn't believe how high it was or how low it was? 25% is just it's a 2-game slate. And somebody's 25%.
A quarter of lineups. No, it's 26.5. So I just said 25 because I felt like it sounded better than 26.5. That they're paying, if you're getting a premium membership, you're really getting that 1.5%.
Yeah. So, I mean, him versus Ibaka was the discussion earlier, and I lean towards Olynyk. I still lean towards Olynyk, and I think it also helps, like I said, that he has multiple position eligibility. Ibaka's only a center. I really like Ivica Zubac as a contrarian play, and he is, unless his ownership is way different now than it was before. Here it is, at 17% for a 2-game slate, a game that could potentially have blowout risk, and he would be playing in garbage time. They have a really thin rotation. He'd also be staggered minutes away from Rudy Gobert, which I think is key here. He wouldn't have to see as much Gobert. So Zubac is the guy who I think, relative to the ownership anyway, because there isn't a reasonable 3% owned play on a 2-game slate, but I think that Zubac is the guy that makes the most sense at center relative to ownership.
The FanDuel night slate ownership. Here's the top 5. And again, hit that like button anyway. Even though we passed the threshold, just do it because we're getting free things for you. And you can always get the ownership projections yourself for all the primary slates, the main slate, the night slate, all the big showdown ones as well at awesemo.com/join. But on FanDuel, number 1, Steph Curry at 78% at point guard. Number 2, Jimmy Butler, 63% rounded up. Number 3, Bam Adebayo at 58%. Number 4, Reggie Jackson at 54%. And number 5, Rudy Gobert at 50%. And our pal Jacob Kimball is asking earlier about what to do at center for FanDuel today, where you have Gobert and then you have not a lot else. I guess Olynyk will be the number 2 owned guy. Ivica Zubac, who Greg just talked about, would be number 3 on FanDuel. And then you have Derek Favors. It's a pretty ugly position. So first, Greg, give me your thoughts on the top 5 owned here, where you have Curry, Butler, Adebayo, Jackson, and Gobert. Does any of them seem over-owned to you?
So the number on Curry seems really high, but then you look at the other point guard options that are available on FanDuel, and there aren't very many because Mike Conley's been ruled out and there is no Goran Dragic. So at least on FanDuel, who else are you going to play the point guard position? You have Steph Curry, you have Kendrick Nunn, who I don't really think makes for a great play. Then we have Patrick Beverley, who his minutes are kind of up in the air. Then Reggie Jackson, and that's everybody. There are 4 actually viable point guards on FanDuel. And I don't really think Nunn or Beverly individually make for terrific plays. So at first glance, the ownership for Steph looks really high until you actually look at the other point guard options. And it's oh yeah, I kind of have to play a lot of Steph.
Yeah, no, I agree. On FanDuel, it definitely seems like more of a must-have. On DraftKings, I just personally don't see it at his price point. But there's a reason why he's 78% owned on one side and not quite as owned on the other. So that's one appreciable difference there. For FanDuel, though, at center, what would you want to do? Because we do have Rudy Gobert. I think he seems like the safest play by far. Guess you could get different immediately by going to a guy like Zubac, but what would you do at center? Because that seems to be a popular question today. These night slates on FanDuel seem particularly tough lately.
Yeah, well, especially because you get positions like point guard where it's like, all right, well, I roster Steph Curry because he's the obvious play. So you get two outcomes there. Either Steph Curry scores a bunch of points and you lose, which is probably the most likely outcome if you don't play him, or you play Steph Curry and you just end up tying with 8 million other people. So it's kind of it puts yourself in a tough situation. However, this is where I think you look at the center position and you look at Zubac, who I think is legitimate upside at 5,100. And that is one way that I think it makes sense to differentiate your lineup. So if you're playing Steph Curry, you can't just play the chalk at every other position, because even if you win, you're not really winning. You're just tying with a bunch of people. So relative to ownership, I think that Zubac is somebody who you could reasonably differentiate yourself without just destroying your lineup.
Yeah, no, I think that makes some sense. And Zubac certainly, does rebound at a high rate. I think there are pathways for him to have a better day here, though. Derek Favors at center, not anybody to sleep on either. Not that we worry too much about DVP overall, but yeah, I think Zubac would be one where you can get different. But it does seem like if you're playing cash, Greg, for the night slate on FanDuel, like Gobert is the one you trust really more than anything.
Yeah, and I mean, it's tough to play cash for 2-game slates,
Yes.
but yeah, if you're playing a 2-game slate, you might as well just look at the ownership and just play the guys who are projecting for the most ownership at each position. So that would be, you definitely go to Rudy Gobert at center, you go to Steph Curry at point guard, and then you just fill in some of the best values and other popular plays at other positions. So Zubac's definitely not somebody I would consider in a cash game.
All right, we got a couple little wrinkles here to talk about, and I know our pal over under was very mad that we went to the Clippers game and didn't keep talking about Golden State. So we can jump back to Golden State side, where I think we talked about Draymond enough, but I guess we could sort of close the loop here, where I think we're both a little bit more down on Steph on DraftKings. On FanDuel, maybe he's a necessary play just because the floor is there, even if the projection might not be the best. Still a raw points game, but Draymond I think is a priority play for me on both the late slate and if you somehow could get to him on the main slate now if you didn't already. But what else for Draymond in particular? How do you feel about him on FanDuel? And then give me your thoughts on DraftKings too.
Yeah, so this is another guy. He's a vastly different play on FanDuel versus DraftKings, because on FanDuel, Draymond Green is 7,600, and he's also projecting for 36% ownership. So I'm a little bit underweight in the build that I have on Draymond Green. Whereas on DraftKings, it's totally different because he's $1,000 cheaper. So Draymond Green at 6,800 is a way stronger play for me on DraftKings than he is at his price on FanDuel. So there's difference between the two sites. And then we talk about the power forward position as a whole, where Bam Adebayo, I said I don't like him as much on DraftKings. I like him a lot on FanDuel at 9,100 because, once again, there are no other options at the position. So if I was going a little bit different, I would say that I prefer to play chalk Bam Adebayo than to play chalk Draymond Green. And then I would go cheaper at the position and either go to Royce O'Neal, Marcus Morris, Serge Ibaka, who I slightly prefer as per dollar plays to Draymond Green.
Okay, no, that's fair. I think on DraftKings, I could see how that would be a little bit tougher, and even with the positional, or the scoring differences, rather, like Draymond really not exactly a block monster or steal monster, even quite. I don't know why I said monster. I just I like the idea of him being like, Greg, that all the Muppets on Sesame Street, besides like the ones that are animals, they're all supposed to be monsters.
No, I just thought they were puppets with a guy's hand up their ass. Like, I didn't realize.
Well, they are that. They're not literally monsters, to be clear, but like in terms of the, what they would be in the animal kingdom, they would be classified as monsters. It's something I learned recently, and then asked my friend who has a small child and spends a lot of time on Sesame Street these days, figuratively, not literally though. That'd be fun too. But yeah, they're all just monsters. Like Grover's a monster, and the Cookie Monster, obviously, it's in the name.
That is true. I didn't think about that. I just thought he was a guy who's addicted to cookies and sugar. I mean, Oscar the Grouch, that's just a guy who is he attached to the garbage can? I never even thought about this. Does he leave the garbage can, or is that part of his body?
I think he's just got like a social anxiety thing. That's really the main part of it. Oh my God. It's honestly funny that it's always the trolls with like fake names and no avatar. Like, at least give me an avatar if you're going to be a frequent troll in every single show every day. Like, I make the effort here, But either way, we're going to talk about whatever here. So take that, Reggie Wilson, as my bouncer, El Negro Loco, handles all the dirty work for me.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too, we have an hour to talk about 2 games, right? Like, I mean, this is valuable information. What if What if you tie for first place on a DraftKings GPP today, and they send you an email and they say, here's the tiebreaker. The first person to respond of the origins of the Sesame Street characters, you win the tournament for tonight. Like, you not listening to this information, you could be costing yourself tens of thousands of dollars.
What kind of animal is Grover qualified as? Would be the question the DK customer service rep would be a part of. And yeah, it's actually a good one from Mike Lamp here. If you're trolling, you're obviously not winning. Yeah, I mean, like it's a stressful game. At the end of the day, if you're coming on the stream here, like it's basically like we're all in the same boat. We're all trying not to drown for the most part. And I think that's, like we're in this together. We're doing lineups with you guys. We're telling you the same plays we're playing. We're telling you when we have good nights. We're telling you we have bad nights. Like it's honestly it's just crazy to me that people get so mad. Like this is just fun. It's just DFS. We're just losing money left and right or winning it sometimes.
Yeah, we're just all in the same boat, just sweating and swapping and spitting, just all aggressively together.
Just boys being boys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just locker room stuff.
Locker room talk about Grover. That's if those were the tapes that came out, it'd be a whole different last few years.
It would have been totally different. And you know what would have happened? They never would have won any tiebreakers on DraftKings.
Exactly. Any other Warriors that you seem to be worthwhile or you find to be worthwhile? And one guy I'm going to point out because I've actually manually been dropping his rates, and maybe it's going to burn me one of these days, but I don't care because I'm just over it. And then not in a way with like Michael Porter Jr., where I thought there was a basis. I think there's reason to have some cause for concern with Andrew Wiggins, where his rebound rate with Draymond is down under 7%, and he's just not doing anything. His assist rate's down too. The usage is pretty much flat, so he's getting shots up. I think it's a little bit lower, actually 20.3% usage compared to 23% on the year. But Wiggins is a guy that now I'm just actively, marking down quite a bit because he's doing so little on the court. Do you feel like that's a wise move? Because I'd prefer Oubre, but it seems like the field's going Wiggins' way, and I just feel like it's a trap. But I say that as somebody who many nights this season has already been burned by Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah, so it's funny because when we first started the show, I didn't really like Andrew Wiggins on DraftKings, but I liked him on FanDuel because I liked where his price point was. That I thought that he made for a good contrarian option in between Lou Williams and Jordan Clarkson. But now the difference is that we have Terrence Mann as one of the strongest shooting guard plays on FanDuel. So now that means that I don't really have that much interest in Andrew Wiggins. So on FanDuel, there's a bunch of shooting guards I'd rather get to ahead of him now. And then Kelly Oubre becomes a stronger play just because of the positional scarcity. I mean, the options at small forward on FanDuel without Kawhi Leonard, we have Jimmy Butler at 9,400. So he exists in the salary range all by himself. Then we have Kelly Oubre at 6,600. He's in the salary range all by himself. And then you go down, then you have Bogdanovich, Ingles, Juan Toscano Anderson. Those guys are all together. And then you start to get to the punt plays. So Kelly Oubre, to me, then becomes a stronger play on both FanDuel and DraftKings. DraftKings I would project for more fantasy points than Wiggins. And then on FanDuel, there's the issue of positional scarcity.
With marking Wiggins' rates down just enough, I actually kind of prefer Juan Toscano Anderson to him, adjusting for price and all that. Still, the raw point's going to be a little bit more Wiggins' favor, but I just feel like the Wiggins train, there's something that is wrong in every single projection system when it comes to Wiggins, and which makes sense. He's probably the most unprojectable player we've ever found in terms of just his consistency, never being there. He always finds ways to miss shots, and then he'll randomly have these 20 rebounds, 20 assists, 50-point days, and it's just like, what is going on here? But I think in this Golden State offense, like he's just not getting the runway to even have that upside. So for me, he's a guy in a late slate where when I see 40% ownership going his way, maybe it bites me, but I would just rather be on the side getting away from him and taking some of the other guys who are actually doing things on the court over and over again. We got a super chat here from William Field saying, fellas, love this content. Thank you. We appreciate that. We will only now read positive comments out loud. Who does Draymond guard tonight is the question. I think what I've observed, and this is just, this is me not having dug too deep on it, only having watched Warriors games here and there. And even then I'm not, paying the closest attention, but what I've observed is Draymond's kind of been playing free safety, which I think has actually enabled him to be more effective offensively. And sometimes you see that, like, I think the logic would be that maybe you put him on Butler, but that's not how Golden State's been playing. They're not shutting anybody down. They're just trying to keep up on the other end, which they can offensively. So I think Draymond, I wouldn't worry about it, but I mean, it depends who starts. So like maybe they put him on Olynyk just to keep him safe or, mostly conserved. But I wouldn't worry about Draymond defense at this point. I feel like that's a thing from a couple of years ago, or maybe in the playoffs if they're in there. So
I'm pretty confident that Andrew Wiggins is going to guard Jimmy Butler. And as much as we just kind of poo-pooed on Andrew Wiggins as a fantasy option here, he's actually been terrific on defense. And there's a case to be made that he should be on an all-defensive team, at least to this point in the season. And so I think he's probably going to be guarding Jimmy Butler. I would assume that, like you said, Draymond plays a little bit of free safety, but I think that if he's matched up on anybody, it's probably going to be Bam Adebayo. And then they'll just throw like probably Oubre on Olynyk or something like that, because Olynyk doesn't really matter, right? He's going to catch and shoot the ball, and he's not somebody who's going to be creating plays off the dribble or anything like that. You don't have to put like a lockdown defender on him or anything like that. So that's how at least I feel like the Warriors are going to approach it. Wiggins, I'm very, very confident will be on Butler though to start the game.
No, I think that seems fair. And maybe that's part of the Wiggins thing too, is he doesn't, he's offensively not as involved. So maybe he focuses a little more attention defensively, and maybe that gives him some value in his career. But honestly, he's made enough money where he could just coast. He could just hang out if he wants. Which,
by the way, when he signed his contract, do you remember that the Timberwolves owner at the time, he said the part of the agreement was that Wiggins had to try harder. He had to promise to improve. And he was like, all right, I'm going to give you whatever it was $148 million, but I want a handshake deal from you that you're going to try to get better at basketball. And he was like, yes, I will. I agree. I agree to those terms. And then he didn't live up to his end of the bargain while he was there, but still cashing those checks.
That is some classic old guy business move. Like, this is what's going to matter, is this handshake deal we've had will undo all of your bad habits and laziness that have occurred since being a top pick years ago that had all the hype in the world. Let's see. Do you think if Wiggins is covering Butler, it'll hurt his offense? I feel like Stephen Leibovitz is just joking about that, but no, I would not be too worried about Wiggins covering Butler. Butler is a man. Well, maybe Wiggins has some like pent up frustration from those Timberwolves days and it's just going to take it all out on Jimmy tonight. But I feel like it might go the other way, where Wiggins completely wilts and is just terrified of Butler. Even wets his pants on the floor. Who knows?
Oh, it's flashback to the scrimmage, right? When Jimmy Butler took on Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins and the other starters, and Butler just played with the third stringers or whatever it was and just kicked their ass. Yeah. Which, by the way, the players have confirmed since then that happened. I think Karl Anthony Towns came out and said that was a true story. So yeah, maybe there's a little bit of big brother mentality, something I'm going to put zero weight into when I go build lineups. But if you want a fun narrative, at least the Jimmy Butler versus Andrew Wiggins dating back to those Timberwolves days.
Also, it's funny that like Maxey got to 12, but this game is still like actually not a blowout now. Or so that Maxey got the worst of everything in this game for Philly tonight, which is unbelievable.
Let's see. What is oh wow, it's only a 10-point game. Does that mean, oh my God, we got a Demarcus Cousins game? Demarcus Cousins ended up playing 34 minutes. It happened for the first time since Christian Wood first got hurt. Demarcus Cousins had to play the fourth quarter just because they didn't get their faces kicked in the game. That was all he needed. He needed the Rockets to lose by less than 20 points, and he was gonna close the game.
It seems like he's currently doing the PJ Tucker of standing in the corner and getting out of people's way on offense. So maybe not the most productive DeMarcus Cousins time, but he just got a block. Good for him. Good for DeMarcus. He's trying.
Yeah, he's got 2 steals and 2 blocks today.
So let's talk about the Miami Heat value-ish plays, because we got a question about Duncan Robinson. We also got some questions in the premium Slack to hit on, but Duncan Robinson we can talk about real fast. I think he's a solid value play. Duncan Robinson, to me, though, does lose a little bit with having Jimmy as the lead ball handler instead of Dragic. Like, we just haven't seen the upside days from Duncan Robinson. Maybe it's just him, but I do think that Dragic sets him up a little better. I think that Robinson, though, ownership-wise on the late slate, 18% ownership in the most recent run, which kind of surprises me. I thought he'd be a little bit higher, but I think the value shifting around has changed it. Duncan, kind of interesting tournament play. I think he's going to be less owned than Kelly Olynyk. He's going to be less owned than pretty much actually, even Andre Iguodala is going to be higher owned. So I don't hate the idea of Duncan. The ceiling hasn't been there for him, but he's, how many threes is he shooting per game now? He's shooting still 8 threes a game. Like, he should have an upside day at some point. It just doesn't seem to come.
He's my 4th favorite small forward on FanDuel, so do it that way you will. But I like him. I have Butler 1, Ingles 2, Oubre 3, and Duncan Robinson 4. So I like him better than some of the other trash cheap options on FanDuel. So I like him more than, say, this actually isn't saying much. It's because the other options are like Kent Bazemore and Max Struss, Precious Achua. So I like Duncan Robinson more than those guys. I like Duncan Robinson more than Juan Toscano Anderson if we're talking about players who are have more relevance for fantasy purposes.
I actually have them having the exact same projection in terms of points, though obviously Toscano Anderson being a little more expensive would mean Duncan goes a little bit more in favor there. But I wouldn't hate going into Toscano Anderson instead of Robinson. But I think based on the ownership, like, he's not chalky he's not even at 25%, Greg. So you could play Duncan Robinson straight away.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same ownership as Kelly Olynyk that we're making all our decisions on before, is that big 25% mark. But yeah, Duncan Robinson, I don't think he's a very high ceiling, but he's somebody who has somewhat of a floor. He plays decent minutes, and for a 2-game slate, I mean, we're not trying to look for somebody who, like, it's other games, it's like, oh, this guy's 4,000. We need to get, 26, 27 fantasy points out of him. Not really that important where it's a 2-game slate. I think somebody who's cheap, who's going to play big minutes, that's almost always going to make them viable.
Saz Cribb has been having a good stretch of his own here, DFS wise. One of the regulars on our premium Slack, which of course you can get yourself at awesemo.com/join. He says Wiggins played with the bench unit last game. Whoever plays with the bench unit between Oubre and Wiggins typically is a higher points per minute guy. Kerr keeps switching who plays with the bench unit. It's an interesting point, and I think that's something we definitely talk about a lot here, where the opportunity is the whole thing. And if you are playing with guys, especially if you're playing away from Steph for the most part, you're going to have some more shots. And I think that's fine. If I get burned by Wiggins today, so be it. But I think that's maybe one little feather in the cap of Wiggins amidst so many anchors also in the said cap.
Yeah, I think so. Wiggins also, look at his box scores recently. Unless he has a real outlier game, I'm not sure he could really kill you. Because Wiggins, when's the last time he scored? All right, so we had one game against Orlando where he scored over 35 fantasy points. Beyond that, though, I think that's the only time in his last 15 games that he scored over 35 fantasy points. Like, he's pretty commonly been in like that 25 to 29 fantasy point range. I don't think he has a reasonable upside to just murder the field, unless it's a game where he's going to shoot like 80% from the field or something.
Yeah, which he has not been doing much of this year, but like it won't shock me at some point if Wiggins turns around for me. But I think with his price isn't dropping enough for me. Like if he were in the mid fives, I probably would be there every day, like Michael Porter Jr. But for now, I'm going to knock his rates down and not feel too good about it. Joshua Trahan in the premium Slack asking who will be the top scorer for the night slate. Interesting question. Greg, if you have an idea off the top of your head, I'm going to try to see if I could actually base it off of my projections.
Steph, and it's not really close. But I also, for DraftKings, I don't think that matters because, I mean, it matters to an extent, except one of the reasons it doesn't matter as much for lineup building purposes is he's so much more expensive than everybody else also. So Steph is 10,500, Jimmy Butler's 8,800. So of course, Steph, we have to expect is going to be the highest scoring player from a fantasy standpoint more often than not, and in terms of real life points also. But the question then becomes, what is the opportunity cost of rostering Steph Curry? Because what cheap players do you look at on the slate and you feel really good about as punt plays? Like Andre Iguodala is fairly popular, and he's not really a good individual play with much upside either, except it's just that Steph Curry has to be the high scorer because he's so much more expensive, but it's also kind of built into the price.
Yeah, I would also have Steph as the projected highest score here. I've got him for 29.2 points compared to 26.3 for Mitchell. But if we're just playing it in terms of odds, like we do on the tip-off show, where we talk about the top point scorer relative to the odds on Odd Shopper, I would say that Mitchell would be the one I would take a little bit less money up front here to win more would be my pick. But Curry's the top predicted guy for a reason. Strixty in the premium Slack asking, you guys like Ingles? Yeah, I like Ingles a lot in pretty much in any spot without Conley. And I would say here on DraftKings, his price, I think, makes him look good again. If he were in the 6K range, like Andrew Wiggins, I probably wouldn't get there because he's 5,900. I think he's a pretty solid play.
Yeah, and my second favorite small forward play on FanDuel behind Jimmy Butler. So Joe Ingles, definitely without Conley. If Conley was in, I would have had no interest in Ingles, but without him there, that's extra minutes for Joe Ingles. Also, the ball's in his hand more. He has to play more of a facilitator role. So Joe Ingles is for sure one of the best forward plays on both sites.
All right. In the YouTube chat, Gabriel Rio saying, y'all are my favorite hosts. FanDuel question, Kelly and Nunn or Jackson and Zubac? Greg, how do you feel about that one, with also accounting for the fact that you're then not playing Rudy Gobert?
So Kelly Olynyk and Kendrick Nunn, or Reggie Jackson, Ivica Zubac. It's Reggie Jackson and Ivica Zubac for me.
Honestly, could be Kelly Oubre. We have actually, this is our first slate where we have multiple Kellys true. And you have to really think about which one.
The reason I didn't think that is because it's FanDuel and it's because of the positions without the flexibility.
Good point.
Right? Like, unless he's playing some weird format where he could play Kelly Oubre at center, or if he's playing like the single game showdown.
Over under asking, would you go Ibaka or Morris? Let's see. I would. Oh boy, that's close for me. 32.5 for me on DraftKings points for Ibaka, 31.2 for Morris. I like both, but I think Ibaka's got more sustainable ability tonight. Whereas Morris, I mean, Greg has some concerns about the defense. I could see Morris being a good play in that spot, but I think on a pure projection basis, I think Morris got a little bit hot the other day and got lucky. I don't think he could do that as easily as Ibaka can do it today.
Well, he's done it 3 games in a row now, Marcus Morris, but I still lean towards Ibaka. But yeah, Marcus Morris has been playing out of his mind. And I mean, that last game was especially ridiculous. The other thing too, though, is it's not just that he shot well. It's also, if you look at his minutes the last 3 games, he's not playing that many minutes. He did get in foul trouble last game, picked up 5 fouls, only played 26 minutes. But so the last 3 games, he's played 25 minutes, 26 minutes, 26 minutes, and he's hitting like 75% of his shots from the field. So it's a 3-game stretch where he's been really, really hot, but that's not something you could predict going forward, that Marcus Morris is going to continue to shoot Let's see, what did he shoot from three? He shot 6 of 8 from, listen to his 3-point shooting in the last 3 games. 6 of 8, 4 of 6, and 6 of 8. So you have to ask yourself, is Marcus Morris somebody who's going to make 70% of his 3-pointers going forward? And no. Whereas that's another reason also to think that what he's done recently, not sustainable. Serge Ibaka has more avenues to score fantasy points.
He's actually shooting 50.5% on the year and 63% true shooting on the year, which is up from 58.6% last year. But maybe some signs of life in Marcus Morris. He got paid, so I guess he's one of those guys who's trying harder as opposed to all the other guys that we regularly talk about here. Mr. Moneybags, final question potentially here: Clarkson or Ingles for a DKGPP? I think if you're not playing Mitchell, I'd be more inclined to get to Clarkson, but I think, Clarkson for a tournament just seems like the move.
Yeah, points per dollar, I think Clarkson's the better play. It's also hard to know, like, what are you doing with that extra salary, right? So you're comparing to, and the slate locked right now. So anyway, so it doesn't matter. And we're also on a delay, so we got the answer after the slate already locked. I have more exposure to Clarkson, but I think Donovan Mitchell scores more points, like 8 out of 10 times.
All right, so we are locked. So there we go. Oh fuck, I didn't finish my lineup. Well, there goes one of the 2 lineups that I had done. That's the sacrifice we make for content. So there's my tilt amidst the sweating and swapping and all the other things we're doing here. Greg, give them the plugs though, because I'll be back tomorrow doing this. I don't know who's doing it with me. Is it you again? I don't think so, right?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the schedule. It could be. I look at the schedule like 5 minutes before I do anything. I figure it out as we go. Follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS. Eventually, I'm going to be doing one of these shows with EMAC. I tried to promote it on Twitter earlier in the week, and then I just never do a show with EMAC. So eventually, he's going to be on one of these shows also. He's had some homework to do though, and whatnot. So eventually, we'll get EMAC in the mix. Follow me on Twitter, and then all the other great Awesemo content we have. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You could find out when all of our 10 consecutive hours of basketball content begins every day.
And actually, it is me again tomorrow with Greg, and then Friday I'll be here with Eric Lindquist. So there you go. That is your late slate shows coming up. Watch everything on the channel. Hit the subscribe button, and of course, go check out awesemo.com/join if you want to get all the data that we reference here every slate for yourself too. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys again soon, and good luck.